Hi, this is Starkie Sowers. Welcome again to another Plus Program training series. Today's topic, genetically modified foods or genetically modified organisms, also known as GMOs, and organic foods. All right, so with that said, let's talk a little bit about GMO foods. A lot of times people have questions about what a GMO food is. And so if you think about it, the name is genetically modified organisms, also known as biodiversity, also known as bioengineered. And so it's kind of a big term, so to speak, to kind of loop it all together. But simply put, GMO foods are just that, genetically modified organisms. So what does it mean to have a genetically modified organisms? Well, ultimately, when we look at the slide here, what we know is this is scientists and other different types of researchers have found out throughout the years that they can actually manipulate the DNA of plants. So they might, for instance, take like corn, and use corn as a great example. They'll take corn and they look at it and they say, well, it doesn't really grow real well in what we call drought areas. So what we can do is we can take a piece, so to speak, of either a virus or maybe a bacteria. Sometimes it's an animal part, and sometimes it's another plant part. And what they'll do is they'll actually splice that in to make it a little bit more resilient, so to speak, to the environment in which they want to grow. At the same time, one of the things that they've been able to do throughout the last 20 or 30 years is be able to make that organism much more resilient to different types of herbicides and pesticides. So when we look at it, ultimately, they have a couple different goals. Number one, they want to have the product, so to speak, be much more economically cheap. So what that means is we're going to be able to put it in an environment to grow at its ultimate yield, so to speak. The other thing that we're going to do is look at that particular organism and be in a position where we want it to be resilient to different types of pesticides and herbicides so we can spray the field. And then finally, we might actually change it nutritionally. We've done that or seen that actually with golden rice, where they had a little bit more vitamin A for different type of Hindu areas where they don't eat animal type products and lack vitamin A, which might cause or lead to night blindness. So what's the big concern about it? So when we look at it, there's a couple different things. Number one, a lot of the research that's been done on genetically modified organisms are actually done by the companies that produce them. So it's kind of weird that here's the company that's producing it, they do the research, and they actually determine the safety of the product. It actually has no third-party independent United States Department of Agriculture studies to guarantee that it is indeed a safe product. So we actually are relying on the scientists, so to speak, of the companies that produce it. A lot of times there might be a little bit of controversy in that. So the other thing that's a big, huge controversy, in the last probably 20 or 30 years, we've seen a huge increase in the amount of herbicides and pesticides being used on the fields and different types of crops. So if we look at the use in 1973, I think it was about 0.4 million kilograms, and now we're up to 113 million kilograms that are being used on a regular yearly basis. So that's a huge increase. We roughly see about a 10-fold increase every 10 years. And there's all different types of designer pesticides and herbicides that come out into the environment. So that's not only been a huge concern for a lot of people, but also a lot of concerns for people that potentially have allergens and things of that nature. So when we look at the different types of plants, so to speak, that are mostly GMO type plants, there's different types of crops that have kind of excelled, so to speak, in those categories. So first of all, corn, canola, which of course are very common crop usages. Alfalfa is another one. Another one is papaya. The other thing is zucchini, believe it or not. Another one is soy. Everyone seems to know about soy, but kind of gives you an idea of some of the different crops that are out there that are genetically modified. And a lot of those crops might be up to 90 or 95% of all those crops being genetically modified organisms. All right, so how would one avoid genetically modified foods? Well, a couple different things. Number one, you'd want to look at a couple different seals that are available. First of all, there's the United States Department of Agriculture. There's the organic food seal, and we're going to go a little bit into that on our next training series. But when we look at that, what it does is guarantee that there would be no genetically modified foods in that particular product. The other thing is the third-party verification system. And so when we look at the third-party verification system, there's a little bit of an audit trail, and we'll get into some specifics on that on the next one. So the big thing to wrap it up, a couple of things. Number one, pesticide use is a huge concern. And then the other thing is anytime we alter the DNA, we actually might introduce a new protein, which is completely foreign to the body, creating allergen type situations. And those are the two dominant concerns that most people are concerned about when it comes to genetically modified foods.